The funny thing about loneliness is how quietly it settles in. You don't always hear it arrive. One day, you're just living your life, and the next, you realize the loudest sound in your house is the hum of the refrigerator. That was me. Sarah Evans, 58, retired librarian, widow of 5 years, mother to a son living 2,000 miles away in Seattle. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my craftsman bungalow on Maple Street and the well-tended rose garden out front. I told myself I was content. I had my routines, my books, my memories. But sometimes, in the deep quiet of the evening, I'd feel it a hollow ache, a sense of being a footnote in my own story. That's why I said yes so quickly when my neighbor, Linda Mitchell, called that Tuesday evening, her voice tight with panic. I was just coming in, my hands smelling of earth and rose thorns, the golden hour light painting my hallway in long, melancholic stripes. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to ask," Linda rushed, the sound of a car starting in her background. "There's a multi-car pileup on the interstate. The clinic is swamped. They've called me in for an emergency double shift. Is there any way you could keep an eye on Ethan for a few hours? Just until his dad gets off shift at 9. He won't be any trouble. He'll just do his homework." Ethan, Linda's son, 14. I'd see him walking to the bus stop, tall for his age but perpetually hunched under the weight of a backpack that seemed too large, his brown hair often falling into his eyes. He had a quiet, serious demeanor, a world away from the boisterous boys who sometimes skateboarded down our street. "Of course, Linda, don't worry for a second. Send him over. You are a lifesaver, Sarah. Thank you, thank you." I hung up and looked around my silent living room. A guest. It had been weeks since anyone besides the mail carrier had crossed my threshold. A sudden, nervous energy propelled me. I put the kettle on for chamomile tea, changed from my dirty gardening clothes into soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater and dark-washed jeans, and quickly wiped down the dining room table. I set out 2 placemats, 2 mugs, and a plate of the lemon ice oatmeal cookies I'd baked the day before. The simple act of preparing for another person made the house feel different, less like a museum of my past, more like a home that could host a present. When the doorbell chimed, its sound was almost foreign. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, the setting sun creating a halo around his silhouette. He was indeed tall, with a lean frame just beginning to fill out, and eyes the color of stormy sea glass, a complex mix of green and gray. Asterisk. "Hi, Mrs. Evans, thanks for having me," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered, but still with the softness of youth. "Please come in." "Ethan, and it's Sarah. Mrs. Evans makes me feel about 100 years old." A faint, shy smile touched his lips as he stepped inside, his gaze quickly taking in the orderly living room, the shelves overflowing with books. He seemed to absorb the quiet, not disrupt it. I offered him a drink. He chose apple juice, and we settled at the dining table. He pulled out a worn civics textbook and a notebook. "It's about local government and community service," he explained, opening to a chapter on civic engagement. "We have to propose a community project." As we leaned over the book together, I was struck by his focus. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. His handwriting was neat, precise. I found myself talking more than I had in ages, not just about municipal structures, but about the why of it all, about food drives at the community center where I volunteered, about how checking in on an elderly neighbor was as important as voting, about the invisible threads of kindness that hold a neighborhood together. He was a good listener, asking thoughtful questions. But I began to notice something else. Occasionally, I'd catch him looking at me, not at my mouth as I spoke, but at my eyes, my hands, the way I tucked a strand of silver hair behind my ear. When our eyes met, he wouldn't flinch away immediately. He'd hold the gaze for a half second too long, then slowly look down, a faint pink tinging his cheeks. I chalked it up to teenage awkwardness, the natural shyness of a boy alone with his neighbor. But there was an intensity to it that felt specific. It reminded me of the way my son used to look at his favorite baseball coach, a mixture of admiration and a desperate desire to be seen as an equal. We worked for nearly an hour. The evening sun faded, and I turned on the soft glow of the overhead lamp, casting a warm pool of light onto our work. Ethan's pencil slowed, then stopped. He stared at a blank margin in his notebook. "Everything okay, Ethan?" He hesitated, chewing on his lower lip. "Yeah, it's just what you were saying earlier about how small things matter, listening." He looked up, and those sea glass eyes held mine with a startling directness. "You talk to me like I'm not just a kid. You actually listen to what I say, even when it's dumb school stuff." The air in the room seemed to thin. His words, so simple and sincere, pierced a place in me I kept guarded. It wasn't a line. It was an observation, raw and unfiltered. "What you say isn't dumb, Ethan," I said, my voice softer. "You have a thoughtful mind. That's a rare thing at any age." On impulse, I reached over and placed my hand gently over his, where it rested on the table. It was a grandmotherly gesture, one of warmth and reassurance. But the moment my skin touched his, a current tiny but undeniable jumped between us. His hand was warm, large, the knuckles pronounced. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand slightly, just enough so our palms aligned for a fleeting second. My heart gave a single hard knock against my ribs. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner became a thunderous metronome in the sudden, charged silence. I withdrew my hand, reaching for my cooling tea, a flush of heat rising up my own neck. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. He's a child. You're imagining things." But the atmosphere had shifted. The comfortable mentor-student dynamic had developed a faint, electric crackle dot. We finished the assignment in a quieter, more careful mood. When he packed his bag, he moved slowly, deliberately. At the front door, he paused, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The porch light caught the sharp angle of his jaw, which was losing its baby softness. Asterisk, "Can I ask you something?" His voice was barely above a whisper, intimate in the dim doorway. "Anything." He searched my face, his expression open and painfully young. "Do you ever feel invisible? Like you're the only one who really sees people, but no one ever really sees you back?" The question stole my breath. It was profound, aching, and spoke to the very core of my own quiet existence. It was not a question a typical 14-year-old asks. It was the question of an old soul. My throat tightened. Sometimes, I admitted, the word coming out rough. I think that's why I try so hard to be a person who sees, who listens, even if it doesn't always come back to me. He nodded as if I'd confirmed something vital. Then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He stepped forward, closing the small space between us, and wrapped his arms around me in a gentle, firm hug. It wasn't a child's clingy embrace. It was deliberate, heartfelt. I could feel the strength in his slender arms, the faint scent of soap and pencil shavings on his hoodie. My arms came up of their own accord, returning the hug, patting his back. A wave of fierce, protective affection washed over me, tangled with that confusing, unwelcome thread of something else, a recognition of his nascent masculinity, the sheer humanity of the moment. "Thank you," he murmured into my shoulder, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't name. Then he was gone, disappearing into the violet dusk, a lanky silhouette against the streetlights flickering to life. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hand pressed to my chest. The house was silent again, but it was a different silence. It was humming. It was alive with the echo of this question and the ghost of that hug. I couldn't stop thinking about him. The next morning, as I stirred honey into my tea, his face, earnest, intelligent, vulnerable, kept appearing in my mind's eye. The way he looked at me, it had made me feel visible, not as Mark's widow or David's mom, but as Sarah, a woman with thoughts that mattered. It was a dangerous, thrilling feeling when Linda texted later, asking if Ethan could come by again after school, another homework crisis. I agreed instantly. I told myself it was just neighborly kindness, but I baked a fresh batch of cookies, chocolate chip this time, his favorite according to a casual mention. I lit a sandalwood candle, fluffed the pillows on the armchair. I was preparing for more than a tutoring session, and the knowledge sent a shiver of guilt and anticipation down my spine. He arrived, and the air between us was immediately different. There was a new awareness, a hello that lingered, a smile that was less shy, more conscious. This time it was English. Julius Caesar, my old favorite. As we read Brutus's soliloquy about the necessity of betrayal for the greater good, I got carried away talking about the tragedy of good intentions, the loneliness of leadership, the weight of moral ambiguity. You love this, Ethan stated, watching me with undisguised fascination. You talk about it like it just happened yesterday. The feelings are timeless, I said, my passion for the subject overriding my self-consciousness. Betrayal, loyalty, doubt. We've all felt them. Shakespeare just gave them the best words. You make it feel okay to think about this stuff, he said quietly. To feel things deeply. Most people think that's weird. For a guy especially. His confession hung in the air. I saw it then, the sensitive boy in a world that often mistakes sensitivity for weakness. I saw the slights he had endured, the parts of himself he'd learned to hide. It's not weird, Ethan. It's your superpower. Never ever apologize for the depth of your heart. He held my gaze, and in that look, I saw a dam break. He began to talk not about Shakespeare, but about himself. The bully in gym class, the father who loved him but spoke the language of sports scores and yard work, not poetry and big ideas. The crushing feeling of being a puzzle piece from the wrong box. You see me, he said finally, the words a bare whisper. The real me, I think. I think you might be the only one who does. It's not true, I protested gently, but my heart was pounding. Your parents, they love me, but they don't see me. Not like you do. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, bridging the space between us. Do you ever wish someone saw you like that? The question was a key turning in a long locked door inside me. Tears sprang to my eyes, unbidden. I looked away, out the window at my rosebush. Every day, Ethan, I whispered. Every single day. We sat in that confession for a long moment. The romantic tension wasn't in any inappropriate touch or declaration. It was in this brutal, mutual unveiling. It was in the recognition that across a chasm of age and experience, two lonely souls had found a reflection in each other. It was profound, sacred, and trembling on the edge of something terrifyingly deep. When he left that day, the goodbye was heavy with unspoken significance. Our world had become the quiet dining room, the pool of lamplight, the sanctuary of shared understanding. The following days settled into a rhythm. He'd come over after school. Sometimes we did homework. Sometimes we just talked. The conversations flowed effortlessly, books, dreams, fears, the meaning of life. I shared stories of my youth, of my late husband Mark, of my regrets about putting my own writing dreams aside. He drank it all in, his attention a balm to my neglected spirit. One rainy Thursday, he came in soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. I handed him a towel. As he rubbed his hair, his sweater rode up, revealing a sliver of toned stomach. I swiftly looked away, a jolt of something acute and feminine firing through me. Stop it. This is wrong. But was it? The connection was emotional, intellectual, spiritual. My body's traitorous response to his youthful vitality was just a hum in the background, a reminder that I was, despite everything, still a living, breathing woman. I fiercely channeled everything into a maternal, mentoring love. Yet, in the quiet of my own mind, I had to admit the truth. This was the most alive, the most seen, the most desired, in the purest sense of the word, I had felt in decades. The romantic tension lived in the subtext, in the way he'd sometimes pause, just looking at me as if memorizing my face, in the way our hands would brush passing a book and we'd both freeze for a microsecond, in the way he'd say my name, Sarah, with a weight that felt both reverent and intimate. It was a slow, sweet, agonizing burn of something that should never be consummated, but whose very existence was changing us both. One afternoon, he didn't take out his books. "Can I show you something I wrote?" he asked, his voice thick with vulnerability. He handed me a folded notebook page. It was a short story. It was about a young knight, lost in an enchanted, sorrowful forest where the trees whispered of forgotten dreams. He meets a silver-haired sorceress who lives in a cottage of light and books. She doesn't give him a map or a sword. Instead, she teaches him to listen to the whispers, to understand his own fear, to see the beauty in the melancholy. She helps him find his path by showing him that his sensitivity was his compass, not his curse dot. It was an allegory. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And it was about us. When I finished reading, I was crying freely. "Ethan, this is extraordinary. You inspired it," he said simply. "After that first night, I didn't know how to say what you made me feel, so I wrote it." I stood and hugged him. This hug was different from the first. It was a merging of two creators, two kindred spirits. He held me tightly, his face buried in my neck, and I felt his shoulders shake once. We stood like that for a long time in the middle of my quiet living room, the rain pattering against the windows. Two souls clinging to a lifeline they'd woven together. "You're going to be a magnificent writer," I whispered into his hair. "Never stop." He pulled back, his eyes red-rimmed but shining. The look he gave me wasn't of a boy with a crush. It was a look of deep, abiding love and respect. It was the purest thing I had ever received. I knew then that this couldn't continue unchanged. We were in a bubble, and bubbles, by their nature, pop. The real world, with its judgments, its boundaries, its immutable facts of age and stage, was waiting. The knock came a few days later. He held a gift, a beautiful, leather-bound blank journal. "For you," he said. "Your stories matter, Sarah. It's time you started telling them again." We sat on the garden bench. The air was sweet with the scent of damp earth and early lilacs. The unspoken hum between us, heavy and sweet as the blossoms. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm, older, "about life, about connection. I know what this is, and I know what it can't be." He met my eyes, and I saw a newfound maturity there, a painful wisdom born from our connection. "You woke me up. You made me feel real and valid and worthy. I'll carry that forever. No matter where I go, who I become, I'll remember the woman on Maple Street who saw me first." Tears streamed down my face. This was the goodbye. Not to him, but to the secret afternoons, the electric charge of understanding, the sanctuary we'd built. "You woke me up too, Ethan," I said, my voice breaking. "You gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone forever. You made me feel necessary." He reached out and took my hand, lacing his long, young fingers with my slender, older ones. It was a gesture of solidarity, of passing a torch. The romantic tension finally dissolved, not with a bang, but with this gentle, heartbreaking acceptance. It transformed into something else, an eternal platonic love, a bond forged in the fires of mutual salvation. "I love you, Sarah. he said, the words clear and true, free of any expectation. It was the love of a disciple for a mentor, of a saved for a savior, of one soul for its mirror. I love you too, Ethan, I replied, meaning it in every way that was right and good and forever. He stood, kissed my cheek, a soft, chaste press of his lips that held the ghost of 1,000 unspoken possibilities, and walked down the path. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. I watched him go, my hand on the journal he'd given me. The ache in my chest wasn't one of loss, but of profound fullness. The silence in my house was no longer empty. It was filled with his words, his story, and the rediscovered echo of my own voice. That night, for the first time in 20 years, I opened the journal. I uncapped my favorite pen. I watched the moon rise over Maple Street, casting its silver light on the roses I tended for so long. They were budding, ready to burst into glorious temporary bloom, and I began to write. Not his story, not our story, but mine. The words flowed, easier than I'd ever dreamed. Because finally, after all this time, I had something to say. And I knew without a doubt that someone was out there listening.